Okay, good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us. So we jump back into a brand new week of our journey through Rabbi Nachman's masterpiece, Likutei Moharan. And this morning's shiur is dedicated, sadly, to the Ilu Neshama now of Devorah Sarah Bas Bentzion. And Neshama should have an aliyah, and the schus of our learning should elevate her incredible soul higher and higher. What a special person. I didn't know personally, but it's Yoni's dear aunt, who we had dedicated a number of shiurim to and we're davening for, and just from the sound of it, from the messages and various chats, she sounds like the most remarkable soul, amazing woman. So her nishama should have an aliyah, Be'ezras Hashem. And Yivol Ben Chaim L'Chaim, Refuah Shalema, for Daniel Avram and Sheni Yehudas. So we should have a complete and speedy refuah shalema, Be'ezras Hashem. Okay, so we jump back into our learning, Torah Zayin. We're in very brief. We've been speaking about the tzaddik who lives life plugged in to the depth that's behind every detail of nature, every particular creature and nature as a whole, which reflect Klal Yisrael as a whole, each individual member of Klal Yisrael, and the details, of each and every particular member of Klal Yisrael. And the way that he does this is by finding the hisparos, the glory that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees in Klal Yisrael, the pride that he takes in us. And when he does this, this reveals Ava and Yira. This is bringing a tremendous revelation for those who are connected to the tzaddik and able to plug into the way that the tzaddik looks at the world and the tzaddik sees nature. This lends itself to a certain gravity. There are emotions that are connected to this. There's the realization of the yira, of the incredible gravity to living life in such a symbiotic relationship with the Infinite One, where we actually have a tremendous amount of meaning and a tremendous amount of purpose. And that HaKadosh Baruch Hu really relies on us, and He takes great pride in us, and every move that we make and every tiny detail really has an impact in a very visceral way. And that's the aspect of Yira, and also the Ava. There's a tremendous tenderness there, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us so much, and Hashem is so proud of every tiny detail. We can't even imagine the tiniest of details already. In the time of the R Yaakov, he told Rabbi Klein that the smallest avodah in their generation was compared to the greatest Mesiras Nefesh of the Tanaim and the Amoraim. And the Chida brings in his sefer a few hundred years later, if that was the case then, says the Chida, imagine now. And I saw Rabbi Yaakov Meir Shechter's sefer quotes that Chida and said, and this was written in maybe the late 1900s, the late 1900s, 1980, 1990, maybe early 2000. If that was said in the time of the Chida, then how about now? And here we are, right, 30, 40, 50 years later, and we can say Allah has kama v'kama v'kama v'kama. So we can't underestimate even the smallest little move that a Jew makes, and what an impact that has, and how much love HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for us. So the tzaddik is revealing Ava and Yira. When a person is connected to a clear way of thinking and a clear way of seeing, and their connection to the tzaddik really avails them the capacity to look at the world in the way that tzaddik looks at the world. And we said basically that the whole thing that holds that structure together is trust. And a person really believes, mamish believe that this is what the tzaddik says. They onboard it. This is the way that we come to look at the world. This is the way that we interpret the world. Because the world requires an interpretation. It's a dream. Like we learned with some of the chaver before Hanukkah and Beis Gabriel. Right? The world is a dream, and it requires an interpretation. And the question is, what is the interpretation? Who are our interpreters? Are they the academics? Is it Hollywood? Is it who the politicians? Who? Because it's always with an interpretation. So whose interpretation should we take? And a person who really not just learns the words of the tzaddik, but really begins gesundheit to take the interpretation of the tzaddik. Right? That's an incredible thing. That they begin to actually look at the world in such a way where they see a world that's the same world as the tzaddik. They see a malchus to kedusha. So then things are clear, and the lashon of Rabbi Nachman is that there's a certain or hatzadik. There's the light that becomes accessible to a person who's connected to tzaddikim. However, when a person's or hatzadik becomes darkened, as a result of a person's actions, as a result of a person not living with cheshbon and not trying to clarify their midos and their seichel. So ultimately, they're not able to access this yira and ava. And the Rebbe had told us that the way to fix this is to fix pgam hamizbeach. And it all comes down to eating, which, interestingly enough, had then been the subject of like a number of different shiurim and different modes of learning that we had done together after we learned that originally. And of course, Rabbi Yehuda set up this incredible thing that really is incredible. And we had our first day yesterday, and I was shocked at how many people, it was almost like a dam, just broke loose. Like it was like everyone had wanted to talk about this, they just didn't have a place. Like everyone's struggling with this, and I thought it was the most remarkable thing. So if you haven't joined that chat, please do. There are separate chats for men and women. Achila b'kedusha. Reach out to me, or you'll find a way to find the link and to get onto the chat. Incredible. To work on this, to have different takanas, but this that a person is working on achila, so that'll rectify teref hadas, that will fix up the mind that's not functioning properly, and that will build up the mizbeach that it was in Chalka Shel Torah of Binyamin Ze'ev Yitrav. Then the Rebbe said, this is what we finished with last week, that the ultimate way of completing the mizbeach is the inyan of Gerim, who, like we said, the Mizbeach, after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, splintered into different sparks, and those sparks went all over the world. Those sparks went into all kinds of food, right, that have to be eaten with consciousness in order to rectify them. The sparks went into all of the nationalities. The sparks went into all the religious experiences. Like Rabbi Nachman interpreted the pasuk, that any place that a human being is feeling a spiritual connection, there's something holy there. It might be completely distorted, and it might be channeled in the wrong direction, okay, but it's Klal Yisrael's job to release all of those holy sparks, to unify them, and to bring all of humanity back into a place where La'avdei Shechem Echad, everybody can come to recognize that there's only one, Echad Yachid Umiyuchad, who wants a relationship with us, a conscious, spiritual entity, who revealed the Torah, and so on and so forth. That's to be mashlim, the chelik of the Mizbeach. And that was the pasuk, Lo Yishkav Ad Yochal Teref, he shall not lie down ad yochal teref until he eats his teref, his food, which is the bechina of the fixing of teref hadas. And how do you do that? How do you turn teref into teref? How does a person be mashlim the mizbeach? And the answer is v'dam chalalim yishteh. And the Targum Onkelos said v'nichsei amamaya yeras. Right? The only way is when we go through the whole process of going through exile from nation to nation, and like those little magnets that we said, like the R Chaim, splinter into different pieces. We draw all of the nitzotzos with us, and the way to do that, like the vehicle to carry those holy energies, are Gerim. Gerim are bringing those sparks back to us. And so here we jump into Eis Hey. Rabbi Nachman says, Ach eich efshar lases Gerim. How is it possible to make Gerim? Va'alayim rechoikim ha'oyim mikdushas Yisrael. And they're so distant. They're so distant from our faith. How is it possible that we should somehow find a way, to reach the Gerim, that they should be misgayer? How could that be? Says the Rebbe, says the Rebbe, the Pasuk Mishlei says, Hain Yosef Rein Rabim. Wealth is a great way to get a lot of friends. Hain, when a person has a lot of money, Yosef Rein Rabim. Person wins the lottery, the most popular guy in the whole city, right? Overnight. Hain Yosef Rein Rabim. Hainu. So says the Rebbe, Al Yedei Tzedakah Shenoisen the Talmud Chacham. The way to fix this is by giving money to the Talmud Chacham, to the Tzaddik Emes. That the Tzaddik Emes is a neshama klalis, shehu kalul mikama nafshis Yisrael, that he contains within himself many souls of the Jewish nation, like the Baal Tanya tells us in the second parak in Tanya, that the tzaddikim are the Rosh B'nai Yisrael. Like Rabbi Nachman will say later on in Likutei Moharan, Rosh B'nai Yisrael is Rosh Hashanah's Rebbe. Right, the Rebbe is Rosh B'nai Yisrael, he's the Rosh. And the Rosh is the place where all the nerve endings of all the parts of the body all lead to the mind. And the tzaddikim have neshamas that are, because Klal Yisrael is like one kaima shlema, it's one huge entity, and the tzaddikim are the Rosh B'nai Yisrael, they're the head. And so they contain within themselves connections to all the different parts of the body. They're neshama koleles. And it's something similar to what the Maharal writes with regard to Moshe Rabbeinu and the Isha Kushis. That Moshe Rabbeinu was such a neshama koleles that really they were suspecting him of different things, and taking a wife from here and a wife from there, and what's going on with the woman. And he says Moshe Rabbeinu was a neshama koleles. He had millions and millions of women that were shaykh to him because his neshama was so multifaceted. And it's reminiscent of something that happened with Rabbeinu himself, with Rabbi Nachman, whose Nebuch, his first wife, was Nifteres, and he had taken a trip to a certain place. I believe, could be mistaken, I believe it was around Shavuos time. And when he came back from the trip, he said a number of shidduchim were suggested for him along the way. And he had met with a number of different options and different shidduchim, and none of them were shaykh, none of them worked out. And he came back and he was talking about his trip, and he said, I want to let you know that each and every one of them was my zivuk. They were all my zivuk. He didn't marry any of them. He said they were all my zivuk. Right? There's a certain Indian of a neshama klalis where there's many different facets to it. So the tzaddik's soul is kolol mikama nafshis Yisrael. And if we give tzedakah to the Talmid Chacham, so in some way that's going to enable Gerim to draw close. Because like we said last week, we're not proselytizing, right? Even though we are trying to spread faith and emunah and Torah and emes, for sure, 1,000,000%, right? The truth of the Torah and the centrality of Yiddishkeit, and we're fighting a hugely uphill battle because the world doesn't like thinking very much, and it's very, 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 very difficult. Very difficult. And it's getting more difficult by the day, but that doesn't mean that we back down and roll over and go to sleep. We have a lot of work to do, tremendous amount of work to do. We have to believe that it can be done. And it can be done, it will be done. But Gerim, we don't try to make. So how is giving tzedakah to the Talmid Chacham, who is the Indian of a neshama klalis, how's that helping? So here the Rebbe explains, Kiva emes, because in truth, Eich efshar la'akum lav le'emunas Yisrael. How is it possible, like we said, for an avodas kechavim azalis, somebody who's an idol worshiper, to come close to the emunah of Klal Yisrael, which is so radically different? They're very, very distant from thinking the way that we think. How could it be that we speak to them and they change their mind? It's like so difficult. So here he says, if someone is very distant from his friend, and it's impossible to say a word or even shout a word, and the friend will hear it because he's way too distant. He's in a different city. So tzarich lichtev liksav. So the only eitzah is you got to write him a letter. Kein tzarich l'shleach b'chinas ksav lehem. So you have to send a letter, the aspect of a letter to the nations of the world. Ad sheyichlu l'shmaya. Until then they're able to listen. Af she'im rechaykim, even though they're so distant. Ki ikar chush. So says the Rebbe, fine. So we have to write them a letter. They have to be able to hear it in a certain sense. But how do you do that? What's the Indian of hearing? Says the Rebbe, Ki ikar chush hashmiya, because the Indian of hearing, hu machmash ha'osyas hadibur nechkakim ba'avir. And the Rebbe was way before his time. There are a number of teachings in the Likutei Moharan where the Rebbe speaks about science, and you sort of have to interpret it through a modern lens. But this is the way it works, right? There are sound waves that are nechkak ba'avir, ba'avirim makin zebazeh, and there are the different sound waves are sort of interacting one with the other until these waves approach the person's ear who is intaking the words, and they are reinterpreted by the brain, and this is how it works. When the air is nach, is settled, v'zach, and purified, v'tzalul, and refined, or refined and pure, then when a person who speaks who is able to speak, when that person speaks, as a nishma hadibur l'merachik, because it all depends on the air. If the air is troubled, then the airwaves are not going to travel properly. If it's a very windy day, it's like a person could scream and it's lost in the wind. It's gone, right? But when everything is very, very still and everything is refined and clear and there's good air, so then words are able to reach very distantly. Like we see, here you go, Avakashi, right? Avakashi is ruach sa'ara. When there's a hurricane, as Iyah Shalachavir Lashmaya, you can't hear it. And it's not clear. The sound gets lost. Until you can't even hear anything, as if the wind is blowing so much. He certainly can't hear any words. You can't even hear the voice. You certainly can't hear any words. Okay, so in order for us to communicate to a distance, which in this context is Klal Yisrael trying to communicate truth to the nations of the world who are very distant from Emunas Yisrael, we need good air, right? That's what we're saying. And everything is like a metaphor. The Rebbe was speaking very physically, practically, but okay, there's not a hurricane that's preventing the Umm Yisrael from hearing us. But in some sense, the air is not clean, is not refined. In what way is the air not refined? And in what way then is giving tzedakah to a Talmid Chacham going to help refine the air? Says the Rebbe, when a person gives tzedakah, it's like he acquires souls. Like we said, Hain Yosef Reim Rabim. Wealth enables a person to increase their social circle. They find a lot of people who care about them suddenly, a lot of friends. Because that's the way it works, and a person's able to build relationships, based on the tzedakah that they have. Like the king Munbaz, a very interesting figure, says in the Gemara, Baba Basra Yud Aleph Avoisai Ganzu Mamin, because he was incredibly benevolent and he was giving money to everybody. And he said, and so people said, like, what are you doing? You're wasting your money. That's not what your parents did. It's not what your ancestors did. He said, fine. Avoisai Ganzu Mamin. My forefathers stored away money, but I'm storing away souls. Meaning I'd much rather invest my money in building strong relationships and being a king who's ratzui, to the am, because ein melech b'lei am, he needs the people. He said, I'd much rather store away souls than store away money. Nimsa, but you find the same idea. Shekol masha noisin tzedakah liyosar anashim. This that a person is giving tzedakah to more and more humans. Aidezehu koine lereim yoser. Through this he acquires more friends. And through this friend and this love that is increased by way of the giving of tzedakah, this is how the air is clean. It's cleaned, it's cleansed. And the more that a person goes ahead and gives tzedakah more and more and more widely, so Mamela, the person is giving a very clear expression to more and more people that he cares about them. That's really what it is, because it's an expression of love, but it has to be sincere. It can't be, right? I don't think it's real ava if a person just goes out and Mr. Beast goes around just dumping money on everybody for his YouTube channel. That's not Ray and Rabin. That's like there's something unhealthy and strange about that. That's not. We're talking about a person who genuinely cares about other people, and he goes out of his way to demonstrate that by helping people out, primarily financially. So the more that he does this, the koina ava im yoser anashim, and he secures and acquires this loving energy between more and more and more people quantitatively and therefore qualitatively. So then the air gets more pleasant and the air gets more refined. Because love is the connection of one spirit to another. That's called Ava, is Dabcha Rucha Berucha. That comes from the Zohar Kodesh. Ta'aynu Ruach HaOyhev Beruach HaNehav. There is a unification between the love and the spirit of the lover and the Ruach of the Nehav, the spirit of the one who is being loved. Shezeh B'chinas Avir Hanach. That this is the Ruach that's Nach, right? That's clear, that's refined, that's pleasant. Sharucham nachim ze im ze, right? That they have their ruchais are in a state of pleasant interaction one with the other. Kein ruach ra, because between them there's no ruach ra, right? Meaning the air is clear between them. They live in a state of harmony. Because you know what ruach ra is, and here the whole thing sort of hinges on this text. Ruach ra shehu sinah. Hatred is ruach ra. When there's hatred, there's no communication. When there's hatred, then there's no capacity for people to communicate and interact. Because sinah is mafrid. Sinah will be mafrid b'neihem, will separate one from the other. And it will preclude the capacity, it will make it impossible for them to hear each other. Ki asino bechinas ruach ra. And here's the whole thing. How does Rabbi Nachman know all of this, right? That ava and this, and that's going to clean the air. How do we know that air is dependent on ava or sinah? It's a pasuk. Because the pasuk in Shoftim says, "Vayasem Hashem ruach ra ben Avimelech o ben anshe Shechem." HaKadosh Baruch Hu will place a ruach ra, a negative spirit between Avimelech and the people of Shechem. What was that ruach ra? Perish Rashi, sinah. So the issue that sits at the core of this, that the Umas Ha'olam are not able to hear us because we're trying to say something to them, but they're too far away, and it depends on the air being clear. So then what's going to prevent the voice from traveling is ruach ra. What's ruach ra? Sinah, says the Rebbe, beautiful. So how do you rectify sinah? Ava. How do you get ava? Tzedakah. Because Hayin Yosef Reim Rabin. Nimtza, Shesino V'chinas Ruach Ra. It emerges that sinah, hatred, is the aspect of Ruach Ra, Bilbul Avir. It means that the air is mivubal, right? The air is completely troubled and confused. Shal Yedei Zeh Ein Yechadim L'Shmei Adibor. So nobody can hear anything. But the contrast is also true. That Ava V'Reyas, love and brotherhood, Hu B'chinas Avir Hazach V'Anach. How special is that, right? It clarifies and cleanses air when there's ava. Yeah.
If there is air, then there is no the water cannot reflect the ponem in a true way. It's the same image.
Right, beautiful. Right, kamayim panim al panim. Yeah, right. The waters have to be still, and there has to be nothing in the way. Nachon. And so the way to clear the air is fill it with love. Fill it with love. Shal yidei zeh nishma dibur lemerachik. And when there's love, and when there's a feeling of closeness, when there's a feeling of being cared for, so then the dibur is able to be nishma lemerachik. It was enasa yidei tzedakah. And the way to do that is through charity. V'chinas hayin Yosef reim rabim. When the more a person has funds, and the more that they're distributing those funds in an authentic way, because they really care about other people, so that adds love in the world. This is how he acquires people who he feels love toward, and people who feel love toward him. And that's cleansing and clarifying the air. So the Rebbe says, if you think about it, then quantitatively this is true. That the more that he's going ahead and giving tzedakah to more and more people, so naturally, the more air is being refined, because the more love that there is, and therefore the more that the whole world is cleansed. When a person gives tzedakah to one person, so now there's that degree of love in the world, because now one person is feels close with him. And there's a real interaction between spirit and spirit. And like a little bit of this world has been conquered with love. A shetach katan. There's just that little shetach between these two individuals. And the more that a person goes ahead and distributes the funds liberally, person by person by person by person, in accordance with what they're able, and he's helping out this one and helping out that one, so then that shetach katan, that small little area that was now filled with love, expands and expands and expands. And it's gadol v'nisrabe yosef yosef hashetach shalavir anach v'azach. So now, based on all of this, the Rebbe says, that's why we need to go ahead and give money to tzaddikim. V'alkeina ikr. So the Rebbe says the easiest and most cost-efficient way to manage this whole process is litin tzedakah l'tzaddikim amitim l'aniyim agunim. To give tzedakah to tzaddikim amitim, to true tzaddikim, neshama klalis, sheklulim mikama nafshos Yisrael, that their soul is comprised of many, 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 many souls. Because if you're good with the tzaddik, then you're naturally good with all of his people. Amazing. Louis Shiner, right? This incredible Nadiv, this incredible Gevir lives in Monsey and single-handedly supports the entire Achnasas Archim of Uman, right? Single-handedly. Pay $100 and you have like 12 meals, like gourmet. Like it's bizarre. mamish, like one of the most sophisticated hachnasas archim arrangements anywhere in the world. It's just to go to Uman, just to witness that is mamish enough, and everything else that he does. This is a person. There's nobody more beloved, in Breslov than Louis Shiner. Okay, this is a little bit different because he taka also gives tzedakah, to the people, and so that's also true. But also there's a bechina of if you're close to the tzaddik and you support the work of the tzaddik, then all the people love you. Meaning all the people respect you because they are the tzaddik. The tzaddik is comprised of all their souls. And so a person who is supportive of the tzaddik emes and the tzaddikim amitiyim, so then says the Rebbe, it's a very economic way because you invest in the tzaddik, you immediately invested in all the people that are connected to the tzaddik. And the greater the tzaddik that you support, and the greater the nation is in need of that particular tzaddik, because he's really a neshama klalis ad l'ma'od. So the more that you're adding tons of love in the world. Ki bezehu magdil ma'od hashatach shel avir anach v'azachana. Because then he's increasing in a tremendous way the avir, the shetach, right? That sort of property of the avir hazach v'hanach, of the clarified, cleansed air. Because over here, you just give money to one source, and you just acquired thousands and maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of reim rabbi of a very many good friends. Came klulim meharba nefashis, because the tzaddik is kalul is inclusive of many, many souls. And then everything changes. And so the Rebbe over here is speaking in a metaphysical way, in a spiritual way, right? Because it's not necessarily practically that the world is visibly different now that a person, gives money to a couple of people and they increase the shetach ha'avir ha'azach v'anach. Like, it's not necessarily something you can sense. In a klalistic way, perhaps it is. But in this, that the Rebbe ultimately says, just give money to the tzaddik, maybe it becomes even more difficult to see how that increases Av in the world. But the Rebbe is promising us that it does. But I think that we also have to think on a more pragmatic, practical level when we speak about trying to reach the nations of the world, not Geirim. This is going to be a different thing. The Rebbe is going to speak about Geirim, and we're not really going in that direction. But there's a bechina right now. We'll get to the Geirim in a minute, but there is an aspect where this is also relevant for what we should attempt to do, which is to try to be a voice of wisdom and reason in the world, no less chas v'shalom, than any of the other wisdom traditions that really did this and accomplished this. Okay, some by conquest and force in Echanami, but some not by conquest and force. I don't think any Buddhist, came to the States and forced anybody to listen to them. They just said something of value, and it was aligned with what the culture needed to hear at that moment in time. And so that we should shy away with 2,000, 3,000, however many years of wisdom and of depth and of relevance, and so we should stand up and we should have something to say. So the question is, how do we do that? And I think based on this paragraph or these paragraphs that the most important thing first is that they should just, even before we communicate anything, because the air isn't clear, they should know that we care about them. They should know that we care about them. In addition to the Crusades, and in addition, Lahavdal Alf Avdalis, why is it that only the Christians instituted something called Red Cross? Like, why is it so apparent to every single human being in the world that Christians apparently care about every human? Like, why, and Klal Yisrael's, no, the impression is that we only care about ourselves, and that we're very insular. And it's true, tzarchei rabim, tzarchei amcha merubim, that the needs of Klal Yisrael are very great. And maybe financially, aniyei ircha koidmin is certainly true, and that's talking about the Yidden. Even though we do find it's halacha about kol haposhid yad noisim lo'ayam purim, that people have a minig over there, that there would be some places where you'd give liberally to Jews and non-Jews alike, which is very deep. Why in purim dafka? But even there, in halacha it says usually because of ava, that it shouldn't cause hatred. But isn't that exactly this din? So over there it's expressed in the contrast, right? We don't want to cause ava. But what about causing ava? Like what? You know what I'm saying? That over there, in an exilic mindset, Over there, the way that the halacha is expressed is that on Purim, when it's so clear that we're giving money to Yidden, so we should also give money to the non-Jews, so that we shouldn't increase Ava's hatred. Sinna is urachora. But if you're listening carefully to that halacha, what it really says is that if you want to remove Ava, so it's not just that we want to prevent Ava, but what about removing Ava? What about finding a way to really make it clear that we're here to service humanity, and to find ways of doing that? If it isn't necessarily about finances, then in some other way, to find a way to help, to find a way at least to begin to project a message that we have something, because we have so much. We're such a privileged people. It's absolutely remarkable. We have so much. And what would that be like? If every person could think in and of their own selves, and if our communities could think and reflect. And I'm not such a practical person, but in the theory, at least, if we start thinking in this direction, I think that it could produce tremendous and practical fruits.
Israel was the first country to send any world disaster things.
Beautiful, right?
Israel had Salah, Mother,
Yeah. The question is whether people identify that with Judaism, and that's a very complex, very, very, very complex topic, right? But it has to be clear it's coming from the Torah, meaning it's a religious imperative, not just a moral imperative. It's who we are as a people. It's a spiritual imperative, and to lead with that, really to lead with that, is really something special to think about, and that clears the air. And then all of a sudden people are willing to listen, because people trust you, because people don't feel like they're being manipulated. People really get the sense you actually care about them. You're really there for them. Something to think about. Okay. So now let's jump back inside, and here the Rebbe says the most incredible thing. Mamish incredible thing. Va'azai, says the Rebbe, when this is accomplished, kisha'avir nach v'zach, when the air is purified and settled and clear, as I kishemedaber zesh yachal daber dibur hayisraeli. When a person comes along who knows how to speak a Jewish word, dibur hayisraeli, who knows how to really encapsulate the essence of the Jewish spirit. Hanu dibur hakadosh, who knows how to say holy things. As I zeha dibur nichta v'nechkak ba'avir. When that person speaks in one place, the words, and here the Rebbe is speaking again in a metaphysical and a spiritual sense, not in a practical sense. In a spiritual sense, the words are etched into the air. Bebechinas l'shoini, like David HaMelech says, my words are 8 sefer mahir, are the pen of an alacritous scribe. And so words can write, right? L'shoini, my words are 8 sefer mahir. And it's like the words are etched into the air. And then those words can travel and travel and travel. Like the pasuk says in Esther about Mordechai, v'shamai hoylech b'chol ha'medinas. And Mordechai's words, hoylech b'chol ha'medinas. They traveled and they were heard in very, very distant countries. Ki machmash avir nach v'zach. Once the air is purified with ava, with love, through the aspect of tzedakah and concern and care for the other, then it's able to be heard very, very, very far away. You know what ends up happening? These holy words end up in the works of the Umas Ha'olam. Medina u'Medina kiksava. Our holy words end up in their svarim, in their religious texts. And then they're reading their texts, and they find some emes in there, and that emes seems not to correlate with the rest of the religion that's added on to the sparks of the mizbeach that were already embedded in the religion, like we said. And these words that are spoken in a context of avir zach and nach, they fortify and strengthen the presence of kedusha in those religions, and in their books they find emes. And this says, like we've seen, Kama Gerim Shenes Gairim Machmazet. There are many Gerim who have drawn close because of this. Because they found in their religious texts themselves things that were contradictory and things that caused them to see the distinction between Kodesh and Chol, between Emes and Sheker. And this Torah was told around Chanukah time of the year 1806. And Reb Nassan writes in Chaim Aran that this year, and Rabbi Nachman have been talking about it, there were many, 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 many Gerim. There was a whole sort of like movement of people, Christians, who were coming and being Nisgayer, or coming very close to the faith of Am Yisrael through this, that they were finding contradictions in their text. And Rabbi Nachman built the whole lesson upon that. And so immediately, of course, what do we do in 2025? We go on ChatGPT, 3, which I pay for the higher model, and I use it quite a bit. And I asked it to write me a report on this, because where am I going to look online? How am I going to research this? It knows all the languages, it can probe all the journals, like this. And you wouldn't believe it. Mamish sent me this whole report, and it says it's absolutely true. In 1806, there was a whole movement in Russia, which was a hugely shocking thing because the crackdown was massive. It's it had to be done very, very secretly and very privately. But first of all, there is the story of the famous Ger Avram ben Avram, right? The Count Pototsky or something like that. Even though that story is unclear exactly where it comes from, and it could be an amalgamation of a number of different people. It's a bit of a complicated thing, and it's one of those things, where the academics are a little bit more skeptical about it. But it's absolutely true that there was a mass movement of people who were really connecting to Yiddishkeit because of this. That they found in their sefarim hepech emunasam. I'll try to download the report and I can send it to the chats, and you can read all about it. It's just an amazing thing when you see something in a sefer, and then today we have the capacity to actually research it, and it's amazing. It's mamish amazing. So what is it that they see steeras? Because what's the whole Christianity? The whole Christianity is built as a layer on top, of our Torah. It's called the New Testament, the Brit Chadasha, right? Why? Because essentially it's based on the Psukim and Nevi'im that describe, in very vague terms, La'asad Lavai, and totally in contrast to the overwhelming majority of Torah Shebiksav, in terms of the very explicit Psukim about who Klal Yisrael are, about the way in which our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu can never, ever, ever, ever be abrogated. It can never be destroyed. Right? And there's a clear Psukim in Devarim, and the whole general monotheistic trend and implications that span the entire Torah Shebiksav, that anybody who has eyes can see that it's speaking about this nation. Anybody with eyes can see the Mashiach is not a god. Anybody with eyes can see basics in Torah Shebiksav. But in a number of Psukim, apply to a very specific narrative, right, that either was created or some elements of which were true, etc., etc., etc. It's a very vague history of this particular person, right, and the recordings of who he was and what he did are only a few generations later, right, nothing was written by him or about him, and Christianity didn't exist in his lifetime, etc., etc., etc. It's the whole huge sugya. Bottom line is, they're building their whole worldview on a number of psukim. And if a person only knows those psukim out of the context of the whole Torah Shebiksav, it's incredibly convincing. It's here you go. Especially when they translate the words that don't mean what they mean in Hebrew because they don't speak Lashon HaKodesh, so they anyway don't know what it means, etc. But a person who begins to probe a little bit, and a person who begins to read Torah Shebiksav a little bit, which they're not so happy if you do, and a person really looks beyond Isaiah 53 and this one and that one and a couple of psukim here and there, and a person looks at the whole corpus of the thing, which is only reasonable to do, especially if the whole tradition is built on Torah Shebiksav. So then they start to see, wait a second, things don't really match up so much. How are you going to deal with the pasuk that says, so these are open psukim. Right, that the whole thing of the Christians is that they rejected God and they broke the covenant, and they can't. It's an open pasuk. It's very clear the trajectory of history. It's abundantly clear. You read the whole section about a Navi Sheker. It's all there. It's speaking exactly about this, etc., etc. And so that would cause a person. That would really cause a person to find it machmas shematzu b'sarim hefech emunasam, and they want to become gerim. They want to become gerim from this. So says the Rebbe, how is such a thing possible? That they should find a hint in their own writings where things are not super clear and aligning, and they begin to suspect that it's all built on lies. Says the Rebbe, this is because of the Devorah of the Tzaddik. Shenechkak v'nichtav ba'avir. Bebechinas l'shayni eit sofer mahir. The Tzaddik's words travel in the air, the cleansed air that's been cleansed with love and with care and concern. And money to the Talmid Chacham, Amiti, the Neshama Klalis. V'avir hayazach v'nach ayidei bechinas hayin Yosef reim rabim. And the air was cleansed through the aspect of money that acquires many friends and does away with the rach rav, sina, and eva. At shahalach hadibor. The bechinas v'shama haylach v'chal medinas v'nachkak v'nichtav sham b'sefreim. It travels through the air and it ends up somehow making its way into their works, into their liturgy. It makes its way into their svarim. And this fortifies to the people that are reading those particular lines in this particular book or these particular psukim. It fortifies this sense that mashulo, something ain't right, and they go to their pastor, and their pastor, either tells them to suppress it or they refer them somewhere else. And sometimes the pastors themselves are not super convinced, and they're more than happy to usher people out of the church. Happens this way. But what can they do? This is their whole livelihood. You really think that so many intelligent people could all mamish, really believe in a sheker shkarim? I don't believe so. I believe many, many, many of them know the truth. I believe maybe even the Pope knows the truth. How could an intelligent person, really? I mean, it's a joke. It's a sad joke. How can an intellectually honest person that knows the text, that knows Lashon HaKodesh, how is it possible for a person to believe in sheker like that? Some melamed schus, they have a livelihood and they have a parnasa, and this is what it is. But I believe that they know the truth. So sometimes when a person wakes up to it, they help them. There are stories like that. They'll say, go to the Jews. You're onto something. Wink, wink. Go to the Jews. And through this, again, this is what was happening back then. That many, many Gerim were drawing close. And again, however shocking that is today if Gerim draw close, imagine then, in 18th century Ukraine, not so simple. Not so simple. People were killed for this stuff. But this is what was happening. And this is all drawn from then. And you can't help but think about, in our generation, when you talk about social media, and you talk about for the first time the capacity to actually write something in one place and for it to go in millions of places through some technology that none of us understand how it works, but we take for granted, and we get upset when our Wi-Fi doesn't work. Keilu, it isn't the biggest miracle in the world, and we don't have the earliest inkling of what this thing is or how it works, but we get very angry if it doesn't. It's an incredible thing, But somehow through I don't know how Wi-Fi, maybe somebody here knows, but somehow, I don't know, that sounds to me like avir zach v'nach, where all of us socially as human beings have decided to build this international infrastructure where we can exist in an online space. And there are channels now that have been created that were never existent in history. It just didn't exist. There was no way for some Jew in Borough Park, to now put something online and it reaches the world, And if anybody doesn't know, the YouTube channel, for example, Tovia Singer, if you ever want to believe in humanity, if you ever want to believe in just the tiniest bit of anything that I've spoken about on the topic of the Umas Ha'olam, which you've probably not heard many other people speak about, and you think I'm totally nutty and batty and all the other words, and I've gotten many messages, don't worry, people, it's so radically different, and it's so MS, but it's so radically different. If you want to believe in the power and the capability that Am Yisrael has to do this work, go to the YouTube channel of Rabbi Tovia Singer, Tovia Singer. Don't even watch any of the videos if you don't want to. His style appeals to some it turns off. Doesn't matter. Look at the YouTube comments. Do yourself a favor. Tens of thousands of YouTube comments from people who, because he's a person who genuinely cares about humanity, and he genuinely does, he loves humanity. Because of the anti-missionary content that he's putting out, tens of thousands of Christians have moved away from the church. Doesn't mean that they became Gerim. He's not trying to turn anybody into Gerim. He's trying to be Masbir the MS, and he does so with love. It's tough love. He has a certain style. He's very tough, but it's with love. And the gratitude You wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, it is such chizuk to see that the world, really, there are good people in the world. There are people who are seeking truth. In a world of, Hail Hitler pop songs with 7 million views on Twitter. I mean, it's horrifying. That is horrifying. That is actually horrifying. That's not like a cute thing. That's horrifying. The culture is shifting, and we ought to be very, very cognizant of it. And it's time. It's time to fight fire with fire. Stand up and be counted, find a way. And he found a way. And I want to remind you, Tovia Singer, I'm sure he's a remarkable scholar, which he is. He always jokes, he knows much more Christian literature than, he's a bucky. He knows more than any pastor. He knows more than the Pope. He knows, maybe he should have been the next Pope. I don't know. He knows everything. He mamish. He has the mamish a bucky. C9, Gaharim. Like, he knows the whole thing. But with all of his remarkable traits, Tovia Singer is one Jew. One Jew. Imagine what would happen if millions of us felt the way that he feels. Millions. Imagine that. Imagine what that would look like. Imagine if this was the value in a religious state of Israel, not a Haredi state of Israel per se, in a religious state of Israel, with varying degrees of religiosity, but our identity is focused on Mamlechas Kana B'Goy Kadosh, and every one of us, with our cutting-edge technology, particularly in Israel, found a way not just to send, relief for, earthquakes in Myanmar, which is also good and beautiful, but religiously. That's what I'm talking about. To put out love to the world, to put out guidance to the world, to put out das to the world, in a way of love and in a way of, I mamish believe that we could change everything. We could change everything. I really believe so. But why are their eyes blinded to the chen of Klal Yisrael? The chen amiti shalem nafal is because there's hatred. Right? And it's like a two-way. So it's hatred. So they can't know how much we love it. If only they would know, then there wouldn't be hatred. So where does it start? So the Rebbe is telling us, got to clear the air. That's the first thing. So before you communicate anything, there's got to be love. There's got to be love. And it cannot be faked. And that means that the work to do really begins here. It means that for us, we need to get ourselves to a point where we can genuinely care about others. V'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha is ani Hashem. How do you get to v'ahavta, like we learned on Shabbos, how do you get to v'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha? By really believing in God. By believing, like the Ishbitzer told us, we learned in Shacharis, Av echad lekulana. Kulam b'nei ish echad nachnu. We are all created in the Tzelem Elokim. The more that we increase our Avas Hashem, naturally, the more we increase our Avas Habriyas, and we have Rachmanis on the world. We have Rachmanis. When we have Rachmanis, it's going to be easy for us to find a way to express our love in one way or another. And then, Be'ezras Hashem, the air is clear, and then there's able to be an interchange of ideas. Let's just finish up, and then we'll finish. Bebechinas v'shamai hoylech b'chal hamadinas v'nechkach sham. We did that. Okay, let's just finish the end of this paragraph. Vav. Bezebechinas. This is the aspect of the pasuk in Esther. Vayimtza kasav asher higid Mordechai. This is a pasuk that's referring to Achashverosh, who can't sleep at night, right? And they pull out the book and they're trying to read to him, and they find over there the kasav. It's written Asher higid Mordechai, what Mordechai had told over with regard to Big Son and Sarash. Says the Rebbe, Mordechai u'bechinas hakfir b'avodah zarah. Mordechai means to deny avodah zarah. K'masher kasav, Mordechai is called Ish Yehudi. He was a Jewish man. And whoever is kofer in Akram, who no longer believes in avodah zarah, in a certain sense, Nikra Yehudi is already called a Jew in some sense. Now, in that context, it's really speaking about Jews. So it's speaking about, even though he came from a different shevet, he was called Yehudi, right? Even though he wasn't from Yehuda, he was from Binyamin, but he was called Yehudi because he was kofer avodah zarah. Fine. So that's speaking about Jews. But there are those who expand it and say that in a certain sense, what it means to be a Jew, right, which isn't like an ethnic thing, it just means a human who's connected to the universal faith is just to be kofer and avodah zarah. is called already a Jew. So Mordechai, who's the aspect of that which is in contrast to the doctrine of Avodah Zarah, his words, like we said before, Vishamai, reference to Mordechai, Hoylech b'chol hamadinos, those words, so the words are etched into the air, until it ends up in their Sfarim. And that's what it says, Vayimsa kasav asher higid Mordechai. What Mordechai said is found written, right? Is found in their Sfarim. Why Mordechai? Because Mordechai is Yehudi. What's Yehudi? The hapach of Avodah Zarah, and it's found in their Sfarim. Shadiburim asher higid Mordechai, shem diburi emunah shalat tzaddik emes. The words of the true tzaddik nimsa kasav b'sefreim can be found in their works. Because they travel very distantly until they're etched and written into their works, into their books. And that means that there's in their traditions that which can potentially cause them to move away from where they're at and to come closer to Klal Yisrael. Because there are some holy things there, and they come from the tzaddik. Kasav asher higid Mordechai. It was discovered, written, what Mordechai had said. And then Kishebaim. When they open their books, their Sfarim, and they see in there Vayimtze Kasav Asher Higid Mordechai Mizenas and Gerim, because of a few psukim later, and in that time of Purim, many of the Amei Haaretz Misyahadim. Why? Because it all hinged on Mordechai. Shamai Ha'lechetz al Medinais, Vayimatze Kasav Asher Higid Mordechai. Boom, Rabbi Amei Haaretz Misyahadim. That causes them there to be Gerim. You're going to ask me, but like, where was the Ava? Like, how did that cause Ava? We have to think about that, because they went on a killing spree, So how exactly did that increase Ava? But going back to what we said, that period of time is even in our own halachas, which I think are very relevant to this whole concept, not to increase Ava, that there must have been some kind of expression of love on the part of the Jews to their host culture that cleared the air and enabled them to find written Hepech Amunasam and Berabim Amei Haaretz Misyadim and Shuasam Yisal Netzach Kein Tialanu. We should experience the same thing, and it begins with us upgrading our concepts, upgrading our sense of identity, who we are, what our task is in the world, and to find a way to carry out our mission, each of us individually and collectively as a whole, as Yisrael Asher B'cha aspire to reveal Ava and Yira, to bring the whole world back to Hashem. B'ezras Hashem.
ואתה האב שלי שכל כך אוהב אותי, האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני